a hybrid, it's easy to think that we're going to go back to normal or we're going to be in the same place. But people have moved away from the areas where they used to live. Like the culture is going to change because people aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
It's not just that you're bringing people back. People aren't there anymore to be brought back.
Hi, Maaria. How are you today? Thanks for joining us.
I'm very good. Very good. Thank you for having me.
Today, we're having a conversation with Maaria Tiensivu. Maaria is a remote innovation coach, and she's the co-founder of Remote Transition. I don't want to spend a lot of time introducing you. I want to let you do that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, your experience, and what you guys do at Remote Transition?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me. Super excited. So I'm Maaria Tiensivu, originally from Finland, but I'm location independent, currently in Lisbon, Portugal. And so my background's in innovation and service design and kind of more in the facilitating multidisciplinary creative teamwork side. So my whole career, I've basically tried to help people who don't really come from innovation or don't necessarily consider themselves creative to create together and how to create that kind of psychological safety, etc. I've always worked in like semi-hybrid modes, so kind of optimizing based on tasks where I've worked, but obviously also face-to-face quite a lot because of the type of work that I used to do. And so for like 2 years now, I've been location independent and coaching individuals on the road. I was actually just thinking about this 2 weeks ago because I was supposed to meet someone face-to-face for a business meeting. And I realized that I haven't met a single person for work face-to-face since 2019, July.
Oh, God.
So it was crazy to notice. So it's been a while, but Remote Transition is, so we coach and facilitate workshops and different kinds of services for companies, individuals, and teams about transitioning to remote and especially hybrid settings as well. And we have a kind of nice group of, I think it's 16 coaches from different backgrounds now, so that we can really like facilitate and help people and companies from very different sectors. Because obviously over the past year, it's not really just been one sector that's gone remote, but it's really everyone. So, yeah.
And of course, there was a massive need, especially last year during the pandemic, when majority of the workplaces went remote. So that gave you guys an opportunity to go out there and start scaling your services outside from what was, I imagine, like nomads and like digital nomads to like a massive audience of loads of and thousands of businesses and employees who are working from home now. Can you tell us a little bit about how you managed that transition and the opportunities that's generated to the business?
Yeah, so exactly like you said, it was interesting to work with this group of people before the pandemic, because you always had to kind of like explain yourself a bit, and it was a very specific audience.
Yeah,
and they were quite kind of in a way used to remote work, because it was a choice that you had to fight for before the pandemic. Like you really had to fight for it most of the time. Whereas obviously with the pandemic, it's the opposite. People weren't necessarily very happy about the transition. So
yeah.
It's been very interesting to follow it from different perspectives, because I think before, when I had these conversations with people before the pandemic, it was always kind of, people were quite skeptical. Even people who were within innovation and kind of forward thinking were still. It was usually something where, like maybe it works for some sectors, but it doesn't work for us. Or maybe it works for another company, but not for us. And now it's obviously very different. I had a chat with someone who I talked to about this in 2019. And I remember him being quite skeptical back in the day. And now he was like, I'm never going back. Like,
Yeah.
no way I'm going back.
Yeah.
There's nothing that you can't do in remote. And actually, even about hybrid, they were quite not skeptical per se, but they weren't really missing those face-to-face parts. And it was innovation and design, which is traditionally quite, or we talk a lot about the kind of serendipitous moments, and you have to be in the
Yeah.
same room. But quite a few of the people I've spoken to who run innovation and design, especially, which is quite complex in online settings, but they've actually found more positives in the remote setting because you can facilitate in a different way. You can get people's voices out in a different way. People who are maybe a bit more quiet or
Mhm.
might not participate in a face-to-face setting, now they can because it's all on the screen.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are definitely all kinds of impacts, and I think there are so many opportunities that we haven't really even tapped into, especially with hybrid facilitation. And yeah, but I mean, obviously there are many opportunities and good things for companies. I think the biggest thing that we see is when you start creating awareness, especially with the coaching programs.
Mhm.
Because no one really teaches us how to work. We just kind of know what the thing is that we're supposed to be doing, or not even that. If especially for junior people, it can be very difficult.
Totally.
Yeah, and but yeah, when you start realizing that, oh, this is actually how I work, that's when you can start changing, and that's when the teams start changing as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of power in that for sure.
So you spend most of your time working with individuals directly. I know you spend also sometimes working with teams as a group, but most of your time is spent talking to individuals and trying to understand how is the best way to support them as they work from anywhere, really.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
what are the things that you hear the most, and what are the things that people normally struggle the most, especially when they do that first transition to work remote?
Yeah. I think interestingly, because even though we work with very different sectors, it's mostly knowledge workers. So it's people who they're very on top of their game. They know that what they're doing, they do their job well. But I think one of the biggest things is the awareness piece that I mentioned. It's kind of starting to really look at how you work and why you do that. And then also, even though it's individual coaching, all of these, every change you make, every kind of light bulb moment you have in a team, that's going to translate to the team as well, because you're going to communicate like, oh, okay, I actually thought that this is what I do, but turns out it's not actually the case. And that's when you start seeing the kind of like snowball reaction
Mhm.
slightly. And it can be these teeny tiny moments when you, for example, thinking of a client who had she was just super bored. That was her problem. And incredibly sharp, incredibly engaged person, but it was just the way of working remotely. She hadn't found a way to make it feel interesting to her,
Yeah.
and she was sitting in a lot of meetings every day, and we've
Mhm.
obviously seen the kind of data on that as well. And it was tiny changes around just completely eradicating notifications of every kind, starting to do crafts, like different things, really addressing and noticing
Mhm.
when she's getting a bit anxious or starting to feel like she's dozing off, instead of just being on your laptop and then starting to reply to emails.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a massive shift in that case, and it was such a small thing, but it took quite a few sessions to really get to the core of that challenge. But yeah, that's the awareness piece really, and the impact of it.
And with common themes like loneliness, burnout, the inability to stop working, and like define those moments during the day where you're like working and you have to go and cook some lunch, and like setting up those I guess times, and being really good at defining moments throughout the day, which are things that we normally here when people move into a remote work, and that's where the things they normally struggle with. Um, what how do you think that is gonna evolve as more and more people work from home and it becomes the new normal for many organizations? How do you think
Yeah.
organizations and especially team leaders should support employees to help improve those areas that are so common in and that people feel so affected?
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, it's very, very interesting how it is because the kind of, I think you had one key thing up there, which is breaks. And that seems to be one of the really, really difficult ones because it's so easy. It's kind of like a, I mean, you obviously do have flow moments in the work day as well. But quite often, the reason we keep working, it's not because we're in flow. We're just kind of in a space where there's nothing kind of breaking the day
Mhm.
into pieces. So if you just don't take those breaks, if you don't create that structure for yourself, people just tend to not take breaks. Like that seems to be just the common thing.
I
Or
think
if, yeah,
it's
exactly.
lost.
And if you do, yeah. And if you do take a break, it's like you grab your phone and do like it's not really a break. It's so you end up not having breaks at all. And long term, that's the one thing that's really gonna not help you because you do need to detach. You do need to really get out and not stare at a screen 100% of the time. And yeah, so in terms of like the future and where it's probably going to go to, weirdly, when you looked at studies even before COVID, like isolation was one of the key
Mhm.
difficulties in for remote workers. I think from kind of like I don't know, my hypothesis is having worked remotely myself before as well, is that because you were kind of usually the lonely one. You were the only one in the company, and you didn't really have that support network
Yeah,
necessarily. Whereas I suppose, like now, post pandemic, it's going to be slightly different because more people are going to be working from home or from anywhere, really,
yeah,
co working spaces or cafes or company co working spaces, etc. But but the same challenge in a way still remains because you're still not necessarily seen every day at the office. You still need to kind of work for that presence,
yeah,
especially in hybrid settings if you're working remotely and your team is at the office. So there's, I think hybrid can be great, but it just needs to be so intentionally designed. And if you don't do that, then you might even add to the kind of isolation and
you have
inequality
to
of,
really think
yeah,
about information flow and like
yeah,
there is so many there are so many layers that hybrid can bring into organization that you really I think that that's a beautiful point. It's like how intentional you have to be to that approach. Otherwise people feel can be end up feeling left out of decision making maybe. It
yeah,
stops like career progression. If they feel like they're not being seen in an office, then maybe that decreases the chances of someone being promoted or not. So, from an organization point of view, that is, and I guess thinking that more, that's where most of the organizations are moving towards that hybrid model. That is a really big challenges in, I guess, in every leadership agenda in the next couple
yeah,
of years.
yeah,
At an individual level, when you hear people and when you work with individuals and you hear like the struggles that they go through, um, how do that affect their how do that affect them in a like mental and I guess like mental health level, and how
yeah.
do you normally help that individual to move to a more safer environment where they can like thrive and be their best at work?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So usually there's like you can kind of divide. So it's kind of like internal and external distractions mostly, and it depends on the person which one is more prominent. So, for example, external distractions like notifications. I don't know if you work from a place that's busy, or you work from, well, in the future, maybe from a co-working, but it might be that there's a lot of people around. So anything that comes from the outside can really have a really big impact, because it does break your focus apart, obviously. And then the other one, which is, I would say my experience even more challenging, which is internal distractions. So it can be anything from, I don't know, feeling tired because you haven't slept well, because you've
Mhm.
probably worked too long, or you haven't plugged off, etc.
Yeah.
These are all connected. Um, or anxiety that comes out because of the uncertainty that you have maybe about your work, especially if you look at junior people, because this is something that I've talked to quite a few managers with. Junior people, because they need a lot more support, because they don't necessarily really know what they're supposed to be doing. There's so much uncertainty,
Yeah.
and that obviously kind of like then turns into anxiety, and then you just then you start having this. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's like, it's really like physical symptoms what we're seeing.
Hmm.
Like people can't sleep, people feel tense, people even have like pains, like a lot of physical pains,
Wow.
etc. And some of it is from sitting too long and kind of like ergonomic things,
Hmm.
but a lot of it is really just about the kind of the mental side of it.
Yeah.
So the uncertainty, anxiety that builds up, and not really knowing if you're doing the right thing, and not feeling focused or productive. It doesn't actually mean, I would say that most people who I've personally coached, at least, they tend to think they're not productive when they are actually doing work, but they have this feeling of not doing enough
Yeah. Yeah.
all the time, and that kind of snowballs as well. So yeah, you asked about managers before, and yeah, there are so many ways that managers can support that, to kind of like check in to support, instead of kind of surveil, or
Yeah. Yeah. What are,
just really.
what are normally the things that you would advise a manager to do, in
Yeah.
simple things like that?
Yeah, I think one-to-ones are so important.
Hmm.
So really having that, it doesn't have to be incredibly long, but it's really like checking in with the person and
Yep.
seeing where they're at. One thing that's also really good is to kind of to have like a really structured schedule for those one-to-ones, and really bring those topics in. And in a way, the coaching relationship and the program has been really good, because obviously everyone knows that they're thinking about this stuff.
Yep.
So these topics maybe come up more naturally. But you can do that even if you're not doing a kind of coaching program, or yeah. So just remembering to, well, to really talk about the person behind the screen, and being curious. And I think can't really emphasize enough, but listening. And especially when you're moving to hybrid, and there's so much fear. This was surprising to me, how many of our clients are afraid, not because of COVID, but they're afraid that the freedom is going to be taken away from them. And so really being there, listening, because I think one of the big questions I'm seeing right now is, should we involve the people in the decision how to go hybrid? Shouldn't we? Should it be top down? Should it be bottom up?
Yeah.
Um, when just, yeah, listen to your employees, like get the pulse of where is everyone at, and then co-create it with them.
Yeah. I've heard and read some horror stories, about workplaces trying to pull people back into the office. So yeah, and I think we're going to see more and more of that,
Yeah.
unfortunately. I want to move a little bit into the culture area, because that's where remote social plays an important role, in helping teams. How do you see that space moving, in the next couple of years? More and more people are gonna have or opt in for the flexibility of working from wherever they want, as we've been talking about. How have you seen in the past that affect teams at a cultural level, and how do you see that moving forward? Like, is it going to be is there going to be a drastic impact in that space?
Yeah, I think the culture part has been, I guess, over the past year, understandably, the culture has been kind of the hardest part, or the part that I haven't really touched upon so much,
Yeah,
because you have to survive, and that's been kind of the
survival
focus.
mode. Yeah,
Yeah, just yeah, get things done and like have a computer work, etc.
totally.
So yeah, I think the culture part is going to become a much bigger thing, and especially in hybrid. Because people, yeah, because I think when we talk about hybrid, it's easy to think that we're going to go back to normal, or we're going to be in the same place. But people have moved away from the areas where they used to live. Like the culture is going to change because people aren't there anymore.
Yeah,
It's not just that you're bringing people back. People aren't there anymore to be brought back. So yeah, definitely culture is going to change. And I think there is still going to be a big part of virtual culture building, and really, like you said, like documentation, processes. I think that the foundation is having like a clear communication strategy and processes, so
hmm,
that everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing, how they're supposed to be doing it. And then the connection side is something that you facilitate one-to-ones amongst employees as well as with managers. And then also, yeah, just doing different kinds of things, challenging the team to bring in their own whole selves, kind of, and like finding each other and finding shared interests, for example. Different things that you would get if everyone was at the workplace, but you obviously can do that in a remote setting as well. It's just I think this is always funny. I was talking to my partner about this because I grew up in I was really nerdy growing up. So I most of my friends were online when I was a teen. So for me, that was always very natural.
yeah,
And and yeah, Tamaj was just saying that, yeah, oh, like didn't really think about that. And it's interesting to see because you can create such deep connections, even just based on text,
yeah,
which obviously contributes to the culture massively. If you can help and create that space where people feel free to connect, they can self-organize. I think that's one of the key things, because quite a few remote companies have people organizing things for the company, which is really good, obviously, and you can obviously do that.
yeah,
But giving people the power to start doing that amongst
yeah.
themselves in remote settings, I think that's going to be very interesting to see. And that's kind of like this similar thing that would happen in the office. It's some
Totally.
people just organize something and then they go and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's such an important point, especially for a lot of organizations that feel that there is a lot of work involved in organizing things for their staff. Um,
Mm.
if you dig into teams, there's so many people that thrive on that
Yeah.
like energy of organizing something for their teams and then being recognized for that. We at Remote Social we call them culture champions, and they're in every single organization, and they're a handful. Like they're out there waiting for the opportunity to show up and bring people together. So that's a I love that point of providing the ability of for teams to self organize, and that's something we are actually thinking about on how we can support in the future. There is a really cool thing about psychological safety that you mentioned in one of our previous calls. How is that? How is that a result of giving people the ability to um, like better communicate and be themselves at work? How do you connect those things, and how do you try to get people to that place where they feel psychologically safe?
Yeah. Yeah, psychological safety is it's a big theme. And but it's also the kind of fundamental part of any team, whether co-located or remote. But I guess in I think this is a conversation I had yesterday with someone who is in the remote field, and we were talking about this kind of illusion that we have now, like kind of end of pandemic. I'm hoping that everything was perfect in the old workplace. And everything worked in the old workplace. Like, oh, we had this psychological safety.
No.
Everyone was having great time. Everything worked perfectly, which obviously wasn't the case.
Yeah.
There were a lot of difficulties in organizations, and psychological safety is difficult even in co-located settings. And but the thing, I think psychological safety is also in a way, it functions the same way in remote and as it does in real life. It's really like, yeah, exactly like you said, like creating clarity. Just, I think clarity and transparency is one of the key things, so that people know what's happening.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, like you can't feel safe if you have no idea what's going on, or if you know that something's gonna, I don't know, come out of nowhere and everything's gonna be taken away. So it's the foundation of transparency and clarity. And then there's, yeah, the kind of, especially multidisciplinary teams, the psychological safety part of kind of, because we have such different communication styles, and this is the thing with asynchronous, for example. We communicate very differently in writing. And when we are in the same space, it may be a bit easier to kind of interpret someone, although we misinterpret people a lot, even face to face. But in writing, creating that psychological safety is it's so important. And I think because we all kind of communicate differently, it's more about starting to get to know your employees and colleagues' ways of speaking when they're writing. So for example, not everyone uses emoji, but those people who do use emoji, like if they all of a sudden stop using emoji, that might tell something.
Yeah.
But if someone who never uses emoji doesn't use an emoji, like it's not the same thing. So it's these
subtle things.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like getting to know the people, how they come across through different channels.
Yeah.
So you just have to build this understanding of who your colleagues are and how you can, because you can usually see when you've said something that might have, for example, offended someone or kind of broken that trust. But then just going in and trying to like approach them as a human, usually not in a team setting if there is a conflict, but one-to-one, maybe just asking like, is there something that I said or did that was confusing? But yeah, it's just fundamental. Otherwise, in remote settings, otherwise things can really spiral out of control.
So what would be the one thing a manager of a team can do to put psychological safety as kind of top of mind when he interacts with his team, and yeah, so it stays as a one thing that is important, because he or she understands that that's if he do that or she does that right, then it's going to benefit the team overall and have a massive impact. What is that thing that a manager could think in terms of when approaching psychological safety?
Yeah, I think probably two things come to mind. One is listening, so creating like an active listening culture where you always assume good intent, but communicate if you feel like there might be a misunderstanding, or to clarify, reflect back. What, like, is this what I'm hearing? Is this what you're saying?
Yeah.
So active listening and reflecting back is very good, because when you reflect back, you very soon notice if you're not talking about the same thing. So that's a very practical thing that you can do. And then just, yeah, leading by example. Because I think especially vulnerability, which is really key for psychological safety. The most psychologically safe teams that I can think of from my experience in the past have been the ones where the manager or the team lead has set that example in a very kind of clear and authentic way.
Yeah.
So as a manager, if you're not vulnerable, if you're not sharing your kind of blunders, or that you might have a bad day, or doing like a weather report, traffic light check,
Yeah.
then you can't really expect your team to do that either. So
Makes sense. Absolutely.
yeah,
Those are two great practical things to keep in mind. Um,
yeah,
I wanna give you just as we wrap up the interview, the opportunity to talk about something really exciting that you shared with me a couple of days ago, which is that you partner with an AI based health data startup.
yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what that means for remote transition?
Yeah, yeah, it's very exciting. So yeah, so it's a startup. They used to work only in healthcare, so it was only for doctors before. So it's very much like it's very kind of like hard data for doctors. And the reason it's so exciting is actually because of what I mentioned before, which is the internal distractions part.
Okay.
So sleep, like anxiety,
Yeah.
all of that manifests in a physical way. And that is actually stuff that you can, if you have a device or whatever you use, that is something that you can see in a much clearer way through the technology. Because usually when we have it, if we don't have devices, I mean, I don't use devices myself, but I really want to get into that,
Mhm.
because it's really difficult to kind of visualize or make comparisons about how you feel, because it comes and goes, it's organic. Whereas when you have access to that data, you can actually see that, oh, okay, last week I seem to have been in some kind of weird state. Where does that stem from?
Yeah.
What might have happened? So yeah, we're very excited to be able to give that opportunity. And obviously with companies, and with privacy, it's going to be, no one has to do it. We're actually not even going to tell the company who is using it. So it's just to support the coaching. Yeah, it's just to support the coaching relationship. So it's just going to be the coachee and the coach who can use the data that comes out. But yeah, it's so interesting to see the kind of next level side of things to an extent, because the coaching we have is so in depth and kind of reflective and fundamental on some levels, that it's very difficult to sometimes see it for yourself when you're being coached, unless the coach points out that, hey, you remember that like 3 weeks ago you couldn't even think about doing this,
Yeah.
and now you are.
Yeah.
So it just gives that kind of like additional level of
Amazing.
visibility. Yeah.
That's super
Thank-
cool.
yeah, feedback loops.
Well, I think we've talked a lot about remote and where it's going. I want to give you just the opportunity to maybe close with any final remarks that you have, where people can find you if teams are interested in getting some coach from remote transition. What is the best way to get to you?
Yeah. Yeah, you can obviously approach me on LinkedIn, or you can email us, or there's a forum on the site. But you can, well, email is probably easiest, I guess, in that sense. So it's Maaria at remote-transition.com. And yeah, we'd love to have anyone who is interested, and to really kind of, at this point when you're starting to figure out especially how to do hybrid,
Yeah.
like this is the perfect place to really give your people the opportunity to have that awareness of
Yeah.
how they work and how they wish to work. That's the interesting part, because some of us don't know, some of us have it very clear, but the kind of the reasons behind why we might think we prefer a certain way of working might be based on something that's not actually true.
Yeah.
It might be fears, or it might be practical challenges that you can actually solve if you just pinpoint them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's the perfect time. Yeah.
A lot of it's a big piece of self-awareness there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty cool. Awesome. Maria, thank you so much for your time. This was super insightful, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again for
Yeah.
sharing all those insights with us.
Yeah, thank you. That was great.